Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mark Fuerbacher. I am coming to you today on a brand new podcast that I'm so excited to be part of. This is the Elevate Rochester podcast. And what Elevate Rochester is, for those of you who do not know, and I think that would probably be many at this point, that is, we are the new version of what used to be the Rochester Business Ethics Foundation. And uh, I was so lucky to get involved with this organization a year ago. My company was nominated for the Ethics Award that they do here in Rochester, and it was such a wonderful experience. Not, initially to be nominated, but then more so the process that they put the companies through to really look at their ethical culture is what really drew me into wanting to be part of this organization. So now we are Elevate Rochester, and now we have gone through, like everybody, this pandemic, and we're trying to look at new ways where we can celebrate ethical cultures here in Rochester. And today with me on the program, we're actually doing this over Zoom. So there's going to be a video version of this as well as the podcast version. And this is the very first sort of kickoff podcast of Elevate Rochester. But with me today, I have Bob Whipple. Bob is the CEO of a company called Leader Grow, known around the world as Trust Ambassador. He specializes in helping leaders and organizations build higher trust. Bob has written 5 books on the topic of leadership and trust, along with more than 900 articles and 100 videos on those topics. He is currently in his 3rd year serving as the chair of the board of directors of Elevate Rochester. Welcome, Bob.
Thanks, Mark. Nice to be here.
And thanks. And Bob also, just before the podcast, told us that he has, 10 interviews already done that are going to be future podcasts here in the coming weeks. So it's awesome to be working with Bob on. Next, I have a gentleman that was one of the first people I really got to know when I joined this organization, because he is the head of our communications team, and him and I have been working pretty closely on trying to invent this podcast, and that is Jeff Halik. And Jeff has held marketing, communication, leadership positions in the federal government. You'll notice in his video he's got some aviation posters behind him, which look pretty cool and intriguing. He's in advertising agencies on the client side. Today he runs Jeffrey Halik Consulting, where he specializes in organizational reputation management. Welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Mark. Great to be here.
And Jeff, and my phone won't keep going off, and I have to unfortunately keep it on unprofessionally, but ethically nonetheless, because I make sure that I know who's calling me and get back to them. And then we have Dr. Deborah Pearce, and Dr. Deborah Pearce, the CEO of Leah James Consulting, leader in leadership and innovation. She's an Elevate Rochester board member, as is Jeff, as is Bob, as you know, as am I now. And she is an interview of our Champions series, which is one of the things we're going to be talking about on this podcast, and kind of why we wanted to do this kickoff podcast. We wanted to let the people out there know that whereas in the past we have done a lot of celebrating ethical cultures through the awards, the ethics awards that we have here in Rochester, and other events that we do through the year. And now we're in a different time. Now we're in the new era of Zoom meetings and Netflix binge watching and all these things. So we're trying to come up with new exciting ways to get out to the public our thoughts on ethics and offer our help on ethical dilemmas and so on and so forth. Bob, I'd like to start with you and talk a little bit about the history of Elevate Rochester. And before we get going with that, I do want to mention to people that you should check us out on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, pretty much wherever podcasts are found, iHeartRadio, as well as you can check out Elevate Rochester on Facebook, LinkedIn. Just type in Elevate Rochester, you'll find us. And you can visit us on the web at our webpage, which is really the hub of everything that we have and that is at elevaterochester.org. So we hope that you'll subscribe to the show and tell other people about it, and I hope that you'll enjoy the content. But Bob, now we're going to talk about a little bit of the history of how the Rochester Business Ethics Foundation came to be.
Sure. Well, in 2003 is when we actually started what we called RABEF at the time, the Rochester Area Business Ethics Foundation. And the whole idea was that the award that we came up with, that we now call the Ethy Award, was modeled after the Business Ethics Award. That was a national organization called Society of Financial Services Professionals. And Alan Ziegler was on that team, and he brought the concept to Rochester. Basically, the fundamental premise is that we spend so much time in the news and all kinds of media lamenting all the ethical dilemmas and ethical problems that exist around the world. And why wouldn't we want to spend equal amount or maybe even more celebrating the organizations that do a fine job of managing and to have an ethical type of organization. So that's how it got started, and we've been working since 2003. This is the first year that we've not had an Ethy Award because we felt it would be a very big burden on folks when they're trying to just survive. So we're saying not for 2020, but we're getting ready to do a wonderful one in 2021. And so we have a roughly 90 to 100, I think it is, organizations that have either been finalists for the Ethy Award or recipients of the Ethy Award. So that's 100 organizations locally that meet a very high ethical standard and that we're very proud of.
Well, yeah. Well, what I always think is interesting is when I first got involved with this from a 30,000-foot view, and you talk about business ethics, and you go, well, how much is there to talk about? I mean, wrong from right. Ethics is ethics. I mean, do you kind of know, like, is there a whole lot to debate when it comes to ethics? Most people know what's right, what's wrong. I was so wrong because when I went through the process of the nomination process, I guess, if you will, it really forced me to look at areas that I really never even thought of. And then, Bob, you were gracious enough to have me at one of the Rochester Rotary meetings where, some questions were posed for ethical dilemmas that weren't so easy to answer. So,
That's right.
So, you typically think, well, it's pretty easy to be ethical and I know right from wrong and do unto others as you would have do unto yourself and all of that kind of thing. But it's not always as cut and dry and clear as that. And
Yes.
Jeff, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about the Ethy Award and kind of how that process went. And even though we're sort of taking a pause right now in 2020 and trying to reinvent ourselves with some of these interviews, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the award in the past and what it might look like in the future.
I'm no expert on the Ethy Award, but I can tell you that it's what I know from people in our organization and from people who apply for it is that it is a rigorous process, and that people not only call it a rigorous process, but they call it well worth it. And they come out the other end having learned a great deal about themselves and their organizations. So as a process, as a thing to do, the Ethy Award's a great thing. It's tremendously wonderful to be a recipient or to be a finalist, but just to go through the process, I understand, is highly rewarding. And we've had a process up till now where we've recognized organizations with Ethy Awards using certain criteria, and we've categorized them in certain ways. And as I understand it, Bob and Deborah can correct me if I'm wrong, that's no longer going to be true. We're going to open it up and make it a more open process in terms of category of organization. Is that correct, Deborah?
Well, the categories had been opening, yes, where although business was in the name of the original not-for-profit that we are, but we also recognize organizations that we do look at excellent organizations who themselves are not-for-profits, or maybe in other industries that are not profit-oriented. I mean, all organizations need to worry about clearing their costs, but are not driven by profit so much. Because we're doing that in the right spirit of ethical organizations, we wanted to expand the name. We'd already expanded the award to companies who might not be driven by profit alone. And then there'll be a shifting of the Effie Award the next round, which is going to be next year, where it's not about the one or two winners, but about the group that has passed the rigorous process and shown to be very strong, maybe even superlative, in areas that we consider critical to ethical principles and behaviors and progress. Yeah.
You know, I want to speak to that for a second, because I thought the coolest thing about it was when we got to the sort of end stages of the process. Elevate Rochester brings in a video crew, and they videotape your company, and that was like amazing. It was so great. Which, by the way, the gentleman who does our videos, I have now become friends with, and have asked him to do other videos for us because he's so good at what he does. And so, you know, what we really are doing is lifting up these businesses that exemplify good ethical cultures. And so from the time that you get this packet of a lot of questions, the first thing these companies do is look at it and go, how bad do I want this thing? I did. I looked at it, I'm like, that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Then I started introspectively looking at it and going, maybe as I answer these questions, and they're kind of like, yeah, maybe 10 or 15 questions, but they require more of an essay response. They're not a quick response. Maybe as I answer these questions, I'll find some stuff out about myself. And certainly enough, right on that front page, it even says that this is not only for us, this is also for you. And that's what it did. It really did let me do a deep dive into our company. And I've talked to other people who have been nominated and have gone through the process, and they all say the same thing. You get to do this deep dive into your company, into your, into what you believe and that sort of thing. And then it gets to the point where you do a video, and that's where you really start to see the values of good ethics. And you get to you talk to your employees, and you find out what they like and what they don't like, and all of these really wonderful things. I will also mention that the culmination of this up until now was at Jiva Theater, which is a beautiful theater, and we had a really nice production. Beautiful mingling beforehand, and getting to meet a lot of great people in the Rochester business arena, if you will, and then just go through the things. It's really wonderful, and I highly recommend any company that wants to go through a process like that. And even if we're not doing an ethics award this year, those packets, I'm sure we could offer to companies if they want to start doing that own sort of self-look at themselves, and maybe even prepare for the possibility of next year's.
Sure, they're on the website. They're on the website, yeah. And they're available. The one other benefit, Mark, that I think is important to mention is that the increased awareness of when you're actually dealing with an ethical dilemma. It's not all that obvious if you haven't gone through this experience to recognize, because human beings have a tendency to rationalize. Well, in this case, this is going to be okay because, and we'll wave something away that isn't really right. But once we go through that process and you say, now wait a minute, we've got a value called integrity here, and this would be a violation of that, even if it costs us money or even if it's inconvenient. We have to do things the right way, because that's now in our conscious mind rather than being able to be waved away somehow.
Yep. Well, just again, always just speaking of my own personal experience, I have never said the word ethics so many times as I have in the last 12 months. And it's great. It's sitting right here. It's right in the front of my mind now all the time. And dare I say to anybody out there listening, not only do we appreciate you being a listener, a supporter, a Facebook like or a subscriber or anything, we would love just to have people join our organization, because there is a lot of work to be done, but it's fun work and it's networking. And case in point, right here on this podcast, I'm talking to 3 people that I feel that I have gained so much just by knowing them over the last 12 months. So, and hopefully I'll be able to give something back to them as well. So that networking is just amazing. Deborah, I would like to talk to you about your experience with doing some of these interviews. Now, Bob has done a bunch of these interviews, and those interviews are coming down the pipeline for our podcast, but you are the very first interviewer, and you are the very first Elevate Rochester podcast. Tell us a little bit about your experience with interviewing folks for what I guess we're calling our champion series of celebrating ethical cultures.
Well, my personal experience is, number one, coming up with the idea in a committee conversation when we realized that asking companies to go through the ETHI process while we're trying to protect their own employees and their own customers and constituents and patients and so forth was not be a good year for that. And so we said, this is not normal. This is not business as usual for us or for them. And, you know, a lot of people were noticing are operating outside, above and beyond business as usual. And let's see if we can catch them doing something new, unique, difficult for community, for people in this COVID, because everything is new and different and confusing and uncertain. And so as we started to look, the list grew. And in my case, I saw one on the list where I had known the founder in my own life and asked if I could do that. And I did something called Pharma Friends. And what I really like about Pharma Friends is that this person, Deborah Paul, the founder, and the other people around her in healthcare, they all have nursing backgrounds, have day jobs. They're super busy right now as people in nursing and pharmacy or whatever are all hands on deck and then some. But they took a moment to figure out how could they quickly pull together energy, pull together funds in 2 weeks' time to get food in front of nurses in the hospital setting. Because of their background, they knew nurses do not stop to run to the cafeteria to eat and come back, because a patient probably, 5 patients probably needed them in that time. So they went to local restaurants and so forth to support local restaurants and delivered groups of meals and had them brought to like meeting rooms, break rooms, whatever, because they knew what nurses were going through, even though some of them were not nursing themselves currently. And they got traction, and now they're repeating. They did the first round, the second round, and so it goes. And I think that they're sharing their ideas with other states. What I love this is that they were already busy. They were already worried, but they knew that there was a group of people that had a need that probably was unseen, because most of us aren't nurses. So they jumped in. Debbie and I spent a few minutes, 10 minutes or so on the phone, created a podcast, and now we can share it with Mark's editing, which does a world of good. But now we can share it. And the whole story is upbeat. We get a sense of what Debbie's like normally, what Debbie's life is like with the nursing, what Pharma Friends is doing. So in a 10 or 11 minute period of time, we all get a view into how this thing got traction, what ignited it, how it's repeating, and then we can move our minds to like, whoa, what can we do? Who else can we recognize? So it was a very uplifting experience for me as someone who took it forward and helped to make it real. And now I'm looking forward to doing another one where two different companies come together in an unexpected way to make a difference with the people who are journeying through the COVID.
If you get a chance, listen to that interview because it's really good. Jeff, I threw Jeff under the bus earlier about having to talk about the Effie Award, but now I'm really going to have him speak to something he knows a lot about, and that is Jeff is the head of our communications team. And I would say the communications team was tasked with some pretty hard work over the last 12 months as we were going into a new name. And not only that, but going into a different direction, away from what we spent most of our time focusing on before, which was the Effie Award, to now having to focus on something very different. Maybe you can speak a little bit to our new brand and, kind of what you see that turning into.
Thanks for that opening, Mark. We are so delighted that we have this new brand that we can use to represent us. While the old name, as you know, you introduced it up front, Mark, the Rochester Area Business Ethics Foundation, was functional. It wasn't truly descriptive or inspirational in any way.
It didn't quite roll off the tongue. So
didn't. It had a great little acronym, RABEF. So that was fun to say and use, but of course nobody knew what that was. You had to spell it out. Just before I arrived on the board, the organization started a process on this rebranding and put some very smart marketing people against it who volunteered their time. And the result is a great name, Elevate Rochester, which is a very energizing name, and a beautiful multicolored logo that has some meaning as well. And I would direct you to our website, elevaterochester.org, to see that. Our thanks to Michelle Roberts for putting together the final ideas on that, the name and the logo. She did a dynamite job. And the board had a lot of discussion around where to go with that, and it ended up in a really nice place. So I think that's given us a real fulcrum point to launch into this year. Unfortunately, we did get, as so many, nearly every other organization, sidetracked by the pandemic. But as Deborah explained, we're doing some great recognition of organizations that are doing extraordinary things. And along with that, we're able to attach our name to that, Elevate Rochester, to each of these stories. And what are these stories doing for us? They're elevating Rochester. We promised that, and we're delivering it. We're delivering those stories. So it's been a lot of fun for us to put them together, even in the throes of this tough time. And the new brand has helped us do that.
So there you have it, folks. This is the introduction to what we hope will be a very successful podcast. It'll be a very successful round of interviews. I think we're going to have many. I think we even have been kicking around some pretty big names to have on future podcasts, but I will not venture into saying who those people are. We'll leave you guessing, and we'll be guessing too a little bit. But I think that this new brand is not only going to elevate Rochester, but it's just going to truly elevate the ethical culture here in Rochester, because we have so many great people in this organization. We certainly could use more. So if anybody out there is passionate about business or business ethics, this would be the place for you. And if you just simply want to get your feet wet and just listen to the podcast first for a while and watch the interviews that Bob and Deborah and the other people on our team are doing, Jeff has some interviews also. We're going to have those out there. Check them out. And, I think for me, I have this vision that down the road, we can really be a source for people to go to our website and go, I'm thinking about doing some business with this company. Oh, look, they're on Elevate Rochester. They have some relation to Elevate Rochester, or they've either been nominated or they've been um, somehow honored by or endorsed by, or they are part of the organization of Elevate Rochester. That's my hope and dream, is that we will be a source for people to go to find ethical people, ethical businesses here in Rochester. We're going to continue to find these new innovative ways to bring that ethical culture to you. Ladies and gentlemen, I am so thankful that you had the time today to do this with me. These podcasts are going to come at you pretty quick. You're going to see a lot of them getting loaded up here on the Apple Podcast, iHeartRadio, Google Podcast sites. So don't forget to subscribe so you'll get a notification every time one of them comes up. And check out our website, elevaterochester.org. Thank you guys very much. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Mark.
We hope that you all enjoy your weekend.
It's a joy. Thank you.